Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we're going to be breaking down the Week 6 Friday night slate of college football DFS action. This is the 4-game slate for Friday, October 4th. And I got to say, each of these 4 games have varying levels of interesting, in my opinion. But we're going to break down all 4, tell you what you can expect from each game in terms of the outcome, and tell you how you need to be constructing your DFS lineups on DraftKings and FanDuel as well in order to make a profit here on this Friday night slate. Now, if you have not already, make sure you check out the Thursday slate as well as the Saturday main slate. Those have been recorded and released already onto the channel. So if you're watching on YouTube, just scroll a little bit down in the channel. If you're listening on audio, scroll down in the channel feed and check out both of those before Thursday and Saturday that we can get those information for those games. Thursday was a nice little 2-game slate, nice little short episode. And then Friday was a bear of a 14-game slate. Again, who asked for a 14-game slate? So it was a little bit longer, but we do have both those episodes out, and I do look to record the Saturday night slate episode sometime before the week is over as well, so make sure you stay tuned for that. All right, and if you want to make sure that you get notified or you know when all of our college football content drops, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and while you're at it, you can check out all of our golf and NFL content as well. All right, let's go ahead and dive in. We got 4 games to get to and not a whole lot of time to waste, so let's go ahead and get. All right, so game number 1 is between Jacksonville State and Kennesaw State. Little battle in Conference USA. New-ish members of Conference USA. Jacksonville State joining last year, Kennesaw State joining this year. And this is it's just not a great game in general. It's not a great game environment for DFS. It's not a really all that interesting game in my opinion. Jacksonville State is currently 16.5-point favorites with a total of 48.5 points. That means the projected total is about 32-16 in favor of the Gamecocks. Fun fact, Jacksonville State is actually not in Jacksonville, Florida. It's in Alabama. Learn something new every day. Also, Kennesaw State, the newest team in Division I this year. This is their first year playing. I'm sorry, not the newest team in Division I. That would be inaccurate. They're the newest team in FBS football. They moved from the FCS level to the FBS level this season, and they have taken their lumps. They have not won a game yet. I do not look for them to be favored anytime the rest of the season. They're probably going to go 0-12. But that's kind of what happens, right? Like I actually worked at Charlotte when we were playing our first year in the FBS. I was working in film that year, and it was 2015. We had just jumped from FCS where we were 500 to the FBS. And if we did not schedule a reeling Georgia State team that was not any good either, or an FCS opponent in Elon, we probably would have been 0-12 too, because a lot of those losses were not even all that competitive. It's a big jump in competition to go from FCS to FBS, and they're feeling it right now. It's just a lot faster game, a lot more physical game, a lot more difficult game, and Kennesaw State is feeling it, even though they were a quality FCS program. Now, let's go and talk about it from DFS perspective. So Jacksonville State, their starting quarterback is Tyler Huff. They had a little bit of a quarterback controversy with Logan Smothers at the start of the season where they were rotating Huff and Smothers. Huff was better, so Huff has ended up being the starter. He's now started 3 straight games, and he's had over 26 fantasy points in every start. He does it the Rich Rod way, though. Rich Rodriguez, former West Virginia coach, former Michigan coach, now the head coach at Jacksonville State. We know he loves his mobile quarterbacks, and that is what Tyler Huff is. He's had double-digit carries in every start. He's going to put up more points with his legs than with his arm, and I got to say, I think this is a pretty good spot for him, right? Like his team is implied for 32 points in this one, so that's about 4 touchdowns. So 4 touchdowns for a $7,100 quarterback where he has the upside to throw for them as well as run for them. I think that's a great spot for him. He is one of my favorite quarterback plays on this slate when you account for the points per dollar perspective. At the running back position, it's a little bit of a committee, but this team does love to run the football. They do have a pretty high rush rate. Trey Stewart last game was their lead back, 16 carries, 96 yards, 2 touchdowns for 21.6 fantasy points. Anwar Lewis was the RB2, 13 carries, also scored 2 touchdowns, 24.3 fantasy points because he also contributed a little bit through the air. So this is a little bit of like a very close to 50-50 split with it being 16-13, Stewart barely having the edge. They've both been effective. They're both going to get run. On a small slate, I like the idea of playing, if you're playing enough lineups, I like the idea of playing both of them. Not in the same lineup, but playing a little bit of Stewart, playing a little bit of Lewis, because I do think that they both can give you value. This is a game where they're projected to win by 2 scores. So they're going to be running the ball a lot. We know Rich Rod loves to run the ball anyway. So I think there's enough running back volume to go around that at price tags of $5,500 and $4,800 that Stewart and Lewis respectively can end up hitting value here on this slate. I don't mind them as cheap running back plays. Now at the wide receiver spot, like we said, this is a heavy running team. So they have a super low volume passing attack. Michael Petway. Why did I think his name was Malik? Michael Petway is their wide receiver 1. He was their wide receiver 1 last season. And look, he's had two decent games from a fantasy perspective, but like it's just not super consistent volume. It's just not super consistent production. I think he's largely overpriced at $5,000. I think there's much better plays down the board. One of them is his teammate Cam Vaughn. So Cam Vaughn actually has the same amount of catches as Petaway. He just hasn't created as many explosive plays, so the fantasy points hasn't been there. But he did have one big game, putting up 21 fantasy points against Eastern Michigan. So I do think that there's I don't know, maybe there's a little something there in Vaughn, but I think there's better points per dollar plays elsewhere on the slate when you consider that this is an offense that's not going to have a whole lot of passing volume. Now, speaking of offenses without a whole lot of passing volume, so let's talk about Kennesaw State. So Davis Bryson is their quarterback. They finally let him throw more than 30 times against Tennessee Martin, and they still lost that game 24-13. He's only passed for over 130 passing yards in a game once this season. He has not had a single DFS viable game where he hit 3 times value for his salary yet this season. I think you can honestly just cross off this entire offense, and it starts with the quarterback. I have no interest in playing him at 4,900. At the running back spot, it is a committee. Benfield and Ashley are their 2 guys. They're going to get pretty much all of the carries. Here's the downside. They're not very efficient. Both Benefield and Ashley average less than 3 yards per carry on the season. Ashley doesn't even average 2 yards per carry on the season. So even though they're cheap, even though they're going to get volume, it's hard to get excited because, at 2 yards a carry, how much volume do you need to have like a good productive game, right? Like you would need to score a touchdown or 2, or you would need to get like 40 carries. So I just don't like the chances of that with it being a committee, and I'm probably going to pass on those 2. And then at the wide receiver spot, it's a mess again. Bohannon is the leader on the season in catches, whereas Wallace is the leader on the season in yards, but I just don't have any interest in this passing attack. I really personally struggle to see how they get to 16 points in this game. Maybe they get some in garbage time, but I just have so minimal interest from a DFS perspective. This offense has looked entirely overmatched the entire season. The one good thing you could hang your hat on, though, is if you do play any of these guys, they're going to be low owned. And in DFS, sometimes a bad play becomes a good play when they're low owned and when they happen to go off. But if you play them, you have more faith in them going off than I do, because I just don't have a whole lot of it. Game number 2 is a battle in the Big 12 between Houston and TCU. TCU is currently 16.5-point favorites with a game total of 51.5 points, meaning the projected score is about 34-14 in favor of the Horned Frogs. For Houston, they've got a little bit of a quarterback controversy going on. Donovan Smith has been the starter for the last 2.5 seasons, and he had some really good games for them. And, he's a guy that we played in DFS a lot the last few years, but he's been just dreadful to start the season, and he got pulled in the middle of the Iowa State game, and currently they are describing it as an open competition between Donovan Smith and Zion Chris. Looks, Chris is a one-dimensional quarterback. About all he can do is run, and he hasn't really been all that efficient in that regard this season. So I don't really know what to make of this. Like, we've seen both of these guys over the last 2 years. To me, Smith is very clearly a better player than Chris, because Chris did start at Louisiana before. Like, we know what he looks like. To me, Smith is better. I don't know why they're trying to make Zion Chris a thing. I know Smith has been playing poorly, but I would try to ride it out with him and gear the offense to his strengths, which this offense is not, and try to make him the guy. But they're having an open competition. I would expect them to split snaps, and to me, it just makes them totally unplayable here in this situation. At the running back spot, it's been a mess for Houston this season. They just haven't had a whole lot of offensive success. Last week, Stacey Sneed did get the most carries with 10. He turned it in 79 yards thanks to a 37-yard run. He's actually had one DFS viable performance this season when he had 15.7 fantasy points against Rice. If you were to play anybody from the backfield, that would be my lean, just because he did have the most carries last week. But Sanford and Jenkins have both had, a little bit of production this season. They are going to see carries. So it's really hard to get super excited about this run game. Like I said, this Houston offense, starting with the quarterback and trickling on down, it's been kind of dreadful this season. Now, at the wide receiver spot, Joseph Manjack missed the game against Iowa State, but I do expect him to play in this game. The beat writer is reporting that he says he's going to play in this game. Everything I could find indicates that he is personally telling everybody that he's playing in this game. And he's their wide receiver 1 if he's active, but does that even mean a whole lot? Like I know this TCU defense is bad, but you would really be wagering on the Houston offense to show us something that they haven't shown all season if you think that Manjack is going to have a productive day. Or the other 2 starting wide receivers, Mekhi Muse or Stephon Johnson, like they haven't really had any big-time performances yet this season either. So like I said, this TCU defense is bad. Houston is rotating quarterbacks, which makes both of them unplayable. And the wide receivers, you're dependent on the quarterback getting them the football. So I don't know. I have a really tough time getting to anybody on this Houston team. And I'm totally cool if when you make your lineups, you want to make this a 16 slate and just cross out Kennesaw State and cross out Houston. Next up, we got TCU, and their quarterback, Josh Hoover, has been one of the best quarterbacks, most consistent quarterbacks in DFS college football so far this season. He has been over 26 fantasy points in 4 out of 5 games, which 26 is about to that 3 times value mark that we would want for him at his salary of $9,100. I like him a lot. This offense is going to throw. And, he's going to be a pretty solid play. He's got a pretty good chance to get to that 27-point total. Now, next up, we have got the running back spot for TCU, and Cam Cook is the guy. But like I said, this is an offense that likes to likes to throw the football. I almost had a little Freudian slip there. They like to throw the football. And so Cam Cook, his rushing value is limited in that regard. However, we haven't really seen them in a game where they steadily blow somebody out, and it's not like a division or an FCS opponent like they did to LIU. So maybe, a game where they're up 2 to 3 scores, maybe that gives you a little bit of rushing volume for Cam Cook. The only downside is he's priced up at $6,000, and I just think there's better points per dollar plays at running back out there than Cam Cook. But again, I could sell you a narrative where Cam Cook has a big game because of how the game flow works out. Now, at the wide receiver spot, Jack Beck, in my opinion, is certainly in the top 2 wide receivers on this slate. I think he's number 1. He's had his last 3 games all over 38 fantasy points, double-digit targets in all 3 of those games, at least 1 touchdown in all 3 of those games, at least 130 yards in all 3 of those games. He has been he's been on an absolute tear this season, the last 3 games specifically, and I'm going to play him until further notice, until DraftKings prices him up to a point where you can't play him. $7,000 is entirely reasonable. In my opinion, he's the top wide receiver play on the slate. If you don't think he's 1, he's certainly 2, and he's a guy that I'm going to be getting in a lot of my lineups, whether he's stacked or unstacked with Josh Hoover. Now, Eric McAllister is a guy that's interesting. He was a Boise transfer that started the season on the bench, but he is coming on strong, having 26 and 23 fantasy points in his last 2 games. He has kind of been the wide receiver 2 behind Beck because Savion Williams has kind of faded just a little bit. He had a really hot start of the season against Stanford where he had over 15 targets, but he's kind of faded a little bit down the stretch. And so I would definitely prefer McAllister to Williams this week, in my opinion. But, in DFS, sometimes the bad play is the good play, and so Williams is certainly going to be lower owned than McAllister, and all it would take is Williams to break off 1 long touchdown, and all of a sudden he's the guy you need instead of McAllister. JP Richardson is a slot that, he's not going to, break off explosive plays. He's not going to, get you an 80-yard bomb for a touchdown. And so if you got that type of guy, that type of profile, he needs to get a lot of volume in order to be DFS viable, and he's just not, because all that volume is going towards Jack Beck. So JP Richardson, $4,100. I don't think he's a terrible play, but he would certainly be a guy that I would play stacked with Josh Hoover and just hope and pray that he doesn't throw all to Beck and McAllister. Next up, let's go ahead and take a quick breather and then let's get to game. Now, before we get on with the second half of the show, I do want to mention there are places where you can get more information from me. First off, you can follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. I'm more than happy to answer any lineup-based questions, any start-sit questions if you reach out to me. You can also follow me so that way you get all the updates from when the new episodes for the show drop. I'm also in the Fantasy Corner Discord. The link is in the description on YouTube as well as on the audio feed. Fantasy Corner Discord is a community of a lot of really smart and really good people who play DFS for a lot of different sports, and we're always in the chat just chatting up lineups, picks, plays, strategies, all that. And, we got all sports covered. College football is one of the chats in there that is the most active. College basketball, when that season starts, is also really good as well. So if you're looking for people to talk DFS with, or, just chat it up and have fun sweating the games out with, join the Fantasy Corner Discord. I cannot recommend it enough. Also, let me rephrase. I do write an article for every single college football DFS slate where I profile my core plays as well as why they are my core plays. This includes the Thursday and Friday night slates. This includes the midweek slates that we're about to get because Conference USA is about to start their Tuesday and Wednesday games. So if you want to know who makes those core plays, head on over to the Patreon, patreon.com/Mike's Money Picks. I always give the disclaimer, it's not like you can just play those guys and instantly win thousands of dollars. It's not that easy. But what you can do is you can get some information from somebody who is well-researched, well-versed in college football, and is able to give you good information that is based off of X's and O's and ownership to help you improve your game. All right, now let's go ahead and continue with game number 3, which is Michigan State taking on the Oregon Ducks. So In this game, we have got Oregon is 24-point favorites, the game total of 52.5 points, meaning that Oregon is projected to win about 38-14. That makes Oregon the highest projected team on the slate, just barely over Jacksonville State. Now, on the Michigan State side, they've got quarterback Aiden Childs, and, he's been okay, I guess. I don't know. I have a hard time saying that he's been good, but also have a hard time saying that he's been bad because I know what every Michigan State quarterback has looked like since Kirk Cousins, and they've looked like a worse version of Kirk Cousins. So basically, Aiden Childs is supposed to be really talented. He's supposed to be really good, supposed to develop. I don't think this is a terrible spot for him against Oregon because, they're going to trail for much of this game. At least I would expect them to. And if they're trailing, that's going to mean more passing volume. More passing volume is going to mean for more potential for fantasy points. So honestly, looking at the slate as a whole, I think he's a little overpriced at $6,800. I would much rather play Tyler Huff at $7,000 or another guy that we're going to talk about here in a little bit at $7,000 even than Aiden Childs at $6,800. But, he's not a bad option. He's going to be low owned. If you get a ton of passing volume because they're down, I could talk myself into a pathway where he ends up being a solid option. At the running back spot, it is a full-blown 50-50 committee for Michigan State. Nathan Carter, last two games combined for 15 carries. Katron Lynch-Adams, UMass transfer, last two games has combined for 24 carries. They're both really expensive as well. I just have no interest in it. This Oregon defense is not great, but it's not bad either. I just have no interest in playing two running backs that are in a committee at over $6,000 in a matchup where they're projected to lose by 24 points. Hard pass. At the wide receiver spot, it's really interesting for Michigan State because they've had a ton of injuries this season. So basically, Jerron Glover, when he's been active, has been the guy. The last two games he's played, he's had 21 and 15 fantasy points, scored a touchdown in both games. He would be the guy that I would be most likely to play. I think he's a great stacking partner with Aiden Childs. They're getting Nick Marsh back from injury, though, and Nick Marsh did have a huge breakout game against Maryland. Played very sparingly against Prairie View. Did not play in week 4, and then against Ohio State. Wait a minute, did they have a game week 4? Let me double check that. Glover would not be the guy to check because Glover's missed games as well. Sorry about this, y'all. Yes, they did have a game week 4. They played Boston College. So Nick Marsh did not play in week 4, played a little bit against Ohio State in week 5. The fact that he's had the one big game makes me think that he could have another one in him, but I don't think it's super likely. Montorie Foster has been the guy that capitalized when everybody else was hurt, but now that everybody's back healthy, he's just not as involved. So, kind of in the order, I would go Glover, and then Marsh, but I think there's a little bit more risk there, and then Foster Jr. after that. Jack Velling is the tight end. He's been a little bit up and down so far this season. If you get a touchdown from him, you might get a solid game, but he does play a lot, so I just wanted to get that one out there. All right, now on the Oregon side, this is where it gets interesting. Dillon Gabriel is quite expensive at $9,700. He has not had any ceiling performances yet this season. His best game has been 32 fantasy points, which barely pays off that $9,700 salary. The simple fact of the matter is the other 3 games he's played have not. I think he's a little overpriced. Now, they are implied 38 points in this game, so is there a chance that he could pay off that salary? Yeah, but you got a long way to get there, and he does not throw the ball deep down the field anymore. So, and he really doesn't run anymore either. So you're going to need it to come from a lot of passing volume and a lot of touchdowns. And I just don't really have a whole lot of confidence in that. So I think Dillon Gabriel is a little expensive for my taste. I would much rather play Hoover at $9,100. I would much rather play another guy that we're about to talk about at $9,000 even. And I think that Huff and then the other guys in the 7Ks, I think those guys are much better points per dollar plays than Dillon Gabriel. But Dillon Gabriel, we do know who he is. We do know what this Oregon offense is. They're implied the most points on the slate. There's a chance that he throws for 5 touchdowns and breaks the slate. I just don't think it's all that likely. At the running back position, it's a little bit of a committee, but not a huge committee. Noah Whittington, 6, 7, and 8 carries in their last 3 games, whereas Jordan James has clearly been the lead back, 17, 12, and 20 carries in those games. Jordan James is the guy you want, in my opinion, and I think with as much touchdown equity, like as much touchdowns as they're projected to score, 38 points, that's 5 touchdowns. I think there's a very high likelihood that Jordan James accounts for at least 1, possibly 2 or 3 of those. I would much rather play Jordan James at running back than play Dillon Gabriel at quarterback, if I'm being honest. At the wide receiver spot, this is where it really gets interesting for Oregon. So Tez Johnson has been the guy in 3 out of 4 games so far for Oregon, 32 against Idaho, 21 against Oregon State, 38 against UCLA, fantasy points that is, 13 targets in that game against UCLA too. But in the one game that he wasn't, the Boise game Evan Stewart went off for 5 catches, 112 yards, 25 fantasy points. So here's what's interesting to me. Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart, it seems that one of them has gone off in every game. Johnson is $3,400 more expensive. So, yes, it does seem that he's more likely to go off, but I would kind of rather play Evan Stewart and gamble that I get the receiver that goes off at a price tag that's much cheaper. That's just how I see it. I don't think Johnson's a bad play. There's 2 other receivers that I would rank ahead of him. He's my 3rd favorite overall wide receiver on the slate, but I would kind of rather take a shot at Stewart, if I'm being honest. Trayshawn Holden is the other starting receiver, and he's been in the middle between 15 and 17 fantasy points in the last 3 games. Not really the explosive games of Johnson or Stewart, but just a steady value play. So I think if you want to really stack up this Oregon offense, you can go Gabriel and then either Johnson or Stewart and Holden. I don't necessarily think that Johnson and Stewart together is the most logical play, given what we've seen from their production so far this season. And then you got Terrence Ferguson at tight end. He's going to play a lot of snaps. He's going to be used in the red zone. If he catches you a touchdown, it's going to be a really solid day at that price tag of $4,000. All right, our last game of the night, Syracuse heading to Las Vegas to take on UNLV. This is an interesting little non-conference matchup this late in the season. So UNLV is 6.5-point favorites. The game total of 58.5 points. The projected implied total is about 32-26 in favor of UNLV. Personally, I think this spread's a little off. I think Syracuse has been pretty good. I think UNLV is getting a lot of love from the situation that they found themselves in the last 2 weeks. And I think this Syracuse team is being a little underrated. But that's just how I see it. Anyway, Kyle McCord is at quarterback for Syracuse, and he's been really good from a DFS perspective. I did not see this coming at all. I thought when he was at Ohio State, he had all this talent around him and wasn't able to do a whole lot with it. Now he's at Syracuse, and he's the engine behind the offense. It's really a complete 180 from what we saw from him last season. He's at $9,000 here on this slate, and here's why I would rather play him than Dylan Gabriel. The passing volume is there every game, at least 39 passes in every game. That includes a blowout win against Ohio. That includes close games. That includes a win against an FCS opponent in Holy Cross. The passing volume is always going to be there with Kyle McCord. And the production has been there. He's thrown for 4 touchdowns in 3 of his 4 games, and that has led to being over 27 fantasy points in all 4 games, exactly 3 times value or more in all 4 games. So I think he's just a much better points per dollar play. I think the upside is there. They're implied to score 26 points in this one. If he throws for 3 or 4 touchdowns, that's a great look for McCord. Now, LaQuint Allen is their primary running back, especially with Walter Nixon out. He's going to see a huge share of the carries, and he gets a lot of use in the passing game as well, at least 4 catches in every game. Running has been kind of tough sledding for this Syracuse team, though. Their offensive line has not been outstanding. They just haven't really generated a lot of yards before contact for LaQuint Allen. So to me, he's a volume-based play. He's going to get a ton of carries. He's going to catch some balls out of the backfield. I would rather play Jordan James than LaQuint Allen, but I absolutely understand the argument for Allen. And if you think that everybody's going to play Kyle McCord and you still think that this Syracuse team puts up points, LaQuint Allen makes a lot of sense. Now, at the wide receiver position is where it gets interesting for Syracuse. So I think that they have one of, in my opinion, the most obvious chalky plays we've seen in college football DFS in a long time. All right. But let's talk about the other guys first. Trevor Pena has been their wide receiver 1 this season. He's been really good. They use him for design touches. They use him all over the field. His production's gone down a little bit each game. That's the only concerning thing. But 32, 26, 23, and 14 fantasy points. I think he's a pretty solid play at $6,700 on DraftKings. Oronde Gadsden is the tight end who is a target machine. Hasn't been super productive in the last 2 games, but was in the first 2. So I kind of would tend to think that Gadsden has a lot of bounce back potential, and this is a decent buy low spot on him. Now, those 2 guys are going to be on the field all the time. This is where it gets super duper murky. All right. You got Amari Hatcher, who was supposed to be their number 1 receiver last year. Didn't really have a whole lot of success. Last 3 games, he's been over double-digit fantasy points in every game. 8 targets against Holy Cross. He certainly gets a decent amount of usage. He's only $4,200. Then you've got Justice Ross Simmons at $3,500. Transfer from Colorado State. This is going to be his first game. He was supposed to be active each of the last 2 games, but didn't really play. He missed the game against Holy Cross. He dressed against Stanford but didn't do anything. So this would be technically the second game that he plays. I don't know how much of a role he's going to have in the offense, but he was pretty good at Colorado State. I would have thought coming into the season that he would have been a starter for this team. But the guy that is the chalky play of all chalky plays is Jackson Meeks. Came in last week against Holy Cross, had 10 receptions on 12 targets, ended up with 35 fantasy points. This comes after a game against Stanford where he came in, had 3 catches, 40 yards, and a touchdown, and that one for 13 fantasy points. And he's only $4,000, which is actually cheaper than he was against Stanford. To me, this is the guy that everybody's going to play. He is the type of chalk that is either going to break the slate like he would have against Holy Cross, or he's going to be the type of chalk that if you fade it, you're in a huge position of advantage. I think he's probably going to be the most owned player on the slate. When you play him at $4,000, it opens up a lot with the rest of your lineup. And like I said, I kind of get it. He kind of seems like he's turning into the guy in this offense. And I'm not going to play him in 100% of my lineups because I generally don't do that with anybody, but I'm probably going to be about 75% on him and hoping that he does come through. And I think the ownership is going to be pretty close. I think the ownership is going to be over 50%. That's just how I see it on Jackson Meeks. So to kind of recap this Syracuse offense, I like Kyle McCord a lot. If I'm playing him, I'm stacking him with 1 or 2 wide receivers, and those wide receivers can be a combination of the lead tight end Gadsden and Pena, and lead receiver Pena, or kind of the value guys, Hatcher, Meeks, or Ross Simmons. Meeks is my favorite. Meeks will be the favorite of everybody else on this slate, though. All right, now the UNLV side is interesting because, they've been in the news a little bit this season. Haj Malik Williams, transfer from Campbell, was at UNLV in the spring. And so he kind of had more chemistry, more camaraderie with this UNLV team than Matthew Sluka did. And so it's why when Sluka left, you kind of saw some UNLV guys on Twitter like either hyping up Haj Malik Williams or kind of dissing Sluka because Haj Malik Williams is kind of their guy. And I think he profiles really well for what UNLV wants to do. UNLV is 4th in the country in rush rate, literally only behind the 3 service academies that are still running the Flexbo. So, this is a guy, that quarterback, that is going to be efficient when he does throw it, but he's also going to run. He is going to get double-digit carries. He is a tremendous athlete. He's a transfer from Campbell. He was a great athlete when he was there, and he's got a ton of upside because of what he can give you with the rushing and how he can be efficient in the passing game, and he's only $7,000. He is one of my favorite points per dollar plays on the slate. This is my favorite overall game to stack on the slate. I think it's very possible to build a Williams and McCord stack and just totally onslaught this game. At the running back spot, UNLV is still running the go-go offense, but with Williams taking a lot of the carries, it's leaving some of the running backs kind of out in the cold. Jaden Thomas has been their guy the last 2 seasons. He just simply gets more used than the other running backs in terms of a variety of ways, in terms of just being in the formation and playing snaps. He gets more usage than the other running backs. I don't think he's a bad play at 5,500, but I don't think he's a great play either. James Burrell and Green are all probably going to play just a little bit, and it's really hard to get behind them, but it's a small slate, so if you're playing enough lineups, you want to take some shots at it. I don't mind it, but I would rather just play Haj Malik Williams than play one of these running backs. At the wide receiver position, Ricky White had really been struggling under Matthew Sluka as his quarterback. 2 games of 3 fantasy points out of the first 3. But Haj Malik Williams knew when he took the starting job that he was just going to find Ricky White. And so Ricky White got 12 targets against Fresno State, 10 catches, 127 yards, 2 touchdowns, 43.7 fantasy points. He is my number 2 wide receiver on the slate behind Jack Beck. I think that Williams made it a point in his first game, is going to continue to make it a point to get the ball to Ricky White in the passing game. And it makes it really hard to target the other UNLV receivers. But I do think that in terms of playing Haj Malik Williams, I would play him either unstacked with no receiver or stack him with Ricky White. If you want to get different, Jacob DeJesus is the other wide receiver that plays all of the snaps for this team. Casey Kane is a guy out of the slot that plays quite a bit, but he really hasn't done a whole lot this season. And then the tight end Balonge plays a lot of snaps as well, but he also has not been productive so far this season. This is a super low volume passing offense, and all of that volume is going to Ricky White. So he would be the guy that I would want in that wide receiver. All right, that's going to do it for this episode, guys. So, we talked about all 4 games. Hopefully gave you guys all the information that you need to build some successful lineups. Like I said, I am currently really, really high on that UNLV Syracuse game. Going to be looking to get a lot of pieces from that game, and then also trying to get Jack Beck into as many lineups as I humanly can. But that's going to do it for this episode, guys. That's kind of the overview for these 4 games. If that helped you out, please hit the like button on YouTube. Please rate and review if you're listening on audio. I promise those help me out a ton, and I really do appreciate it when you guys do that. But we're going to go ahead and get on out of here. Check out the Thursday slate if you have not already. Check out the Saturday slate if you have not already. We're going to be back tomorrow night doing the Saturday night slate. So make sure you're subscribed so that way you can be with us for that and the rest of the college football season all the way through the rest of the schedule. But that's going to do it, guys. Best of luck to you guys on this Friday slate. Hopefully I was able to give you guys some good information to build your lineups. Thank you guys for watching and listening to this point, and I will see you guys next time.